Thomas was sitting in his favorite chair by the window, watching the sunset slowly slide across the horizon. He is over 60 years old, and although he no longer works, life seems to have only become more peaceful. For all these years, he woke up with the sun, and in the evening he sat with a cup of tea, watching the day change. Yes, his life had its usual routine, but he liked it. Megan, his wife, was by his side, and they got used to this silence, to their evenings together, when they didn't need many words to feel connected. Thomas met Megan when he was 30. She was beautiful, intelligent, and at first glance, they seemed to fit together like two halves of a whole. She was always the kind of person with whom you could talk about everything from politics to literature, and then sit silently next to her, enjoying her company. She was the one who helped him through difficulties, was his support. And although life was not perfect, he never doubted that they would do anything to be together. Family, children, joint projects, everything looked like they had planned. And they were one team, and even after years of living together, Thomas felt the same strong attachment he had felt in his youth. And Megan didn't seem any different. She was definitely one of the best parts of his life. But even during their time together, when everything seemed stable and familiar, Thomas began to notice some small things that worried him. At first, it was just a change in behavior. Megan began to spend more time at the computer, and it suddenly became difficult for her to find time for joint activities or even just for dinners together. He tried not to pay attention to these little things, because life does not stand still, and work, children, everyday life, all this could affect her mood. But every year these small changes became more noticeable. Megan was staying late at work more and more often, and sometimes even on weekends. She started spending more time with friends Thomas had never heard of before. And he could hear her voice on the phone at night, but they were not the same conversations they used to have. They were shorter, less personal. And although he tried not to pay too much attention to these changes, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was going wrong. One evening, after another futile attempt to spend an evening together, Thomas was left alone with himself. He was going over the last few months in his head. Something was wrong, but he couldn't pinpoint exactly what it was. Megan was closer than ever, but she had become more unreachable. When he asked her about work or her plans for the evening, she would mostly respond with one word. Although Thomas had no proof, he felt as if there had been an invisible wall between them all along. He remembered the times when they used to dream together, about growing old, about how they would spend their evenings, about talking endlessly about everything that bothered them. But now those conversations were rare and short. Thomas couldn't shake the feeling that he was becoming less important to Megan every day. In his mind, Thomas could not shake the feeling that something was changing every day. Sometimes he noticed her spending a lot of time on her phone, turning away when he walked by. Other times, her gaze was so far away, as if she were in some other world. He tried to talk to her, but Megan always had excuses. "I'm sorry. I'm very tired right now. Maybe next time. I have a lot of work to do." Thomas was not naive. He knew that all these changes could not have been a mere coincidence. And although he was afraid of it, he began to think that their perfect world was just a shell under which something unpleasant was trying to get out. Thomas sat looking at the empty chair next to him, where his wife had been sitting a few years ago. They were laughing, joking with each other, planning the future. And now his seat remained empty, and this feeling of emptiness was getting heavier every day. He began to think more about what was happening, and why he could not see what was really happening. What had happened to the couple who loved each other so much, who had gone through all the hardships of life together? Was it possible that all this was just the beginning of what was to come? Thomas did not know the answer. But one thing was clear: something had changed, and he would have to find out what it was. And he realized that his life would never be the same again. Thomas woke up early as usual and after his usual coffee, he went to work. But today he had a feeling that something was wrong. An invisible discomfort, like a heavy fog, enveloped his heart before he even left the house. And it wasn't anything specific, just a feeling that something had changed, and he couldn't figure out what it was. Megan was at home, as she always was, though she was always there when he came home from work, greeting him with a smile, kissing him on the cheek, and asking him how his day was. Everything looked the same as always, but not the same as before. There were little things that kept him on his toast, the look he noticed in her eyes sometimes when she thought he didn't see. It wasn't the usual love, but something else, something heavy that he couldn't understand. Sometimes Thomas noticed Megan spending more and more time on the phone. This was not unusual after all. Everyone is always on their phones nowadays. But something about her behavior seemed strange to him. The way she hid the screen when he approached, the way she quickly turned off the call when he entered the room. All these small but clear signals caused him to feel uneasy, unlike his other doubts. One day, after returning home from work early, Thomas noticed Megan sitting on the couch, leaning over her phone. She was very focused and didn't notice him coming in. When he approached, she quickly hid the screen as if she had heard his footsteps. Of course, she didn't say anything to him, just smiled as usual, but something was wrong. The look in her eyes, which had always given him peace of mind, now contained anxiety. Thomas decided not to ask about it, although he felt it was hard to forget that moment. It was like a small mirror reflecting his distrust. He couldn't shake the feeling that something was being hidden, even if he couldn't quite put his finger on it. After a few days, Thomas began to notice other changes. Megan became less interested in his stories, not even paying attention to what he was saying. When they sat together at dinner, she looked at her phone more than she listened to him. It became tangible for him. He tried to talk about his work, about the problems he was having at work, but Megan just nodded her head, not engaging in conversation. "Megan, you look a little different today," he tried one evening. Her gaze changed for a moment, and he noticed how distracted she was. The answer was a short, barely noticeable smile. "Thomas, everything is fine. I'm just a little tired." He couldn't say anything more. Something in her tone, in her eyes, made him feel alienated. But he felt even more strongly the thrilling fear that began to slowly crowd out everything else. That evening, after the conversation, when Thomas was alone with himself, he decided to check Megan's phone. He didn't know why, but it was necessary. No matter how hard he tried to stay calm, his suspicion became very strong. He opened her calls and messages. Nothing special, a few messages from friends and colleagues, a few missed calls from unknown numbers, and then his eyes lingered on one conversation. It was a short messaging. "You always look so slim. I can't wait to see you again." Thomas didn't understand who could have written this, but his heart was in pain. Was it just a friendly message? Or was it the same tone he had already sensed as something more than just friendship? He tried to find a logic, but doubt tore at his thoughts. Time passed, but Thomas could not let go of this thought. There were several options in his mind, but none gave him peace of mind. Was it just him being overly suspicious, or was he really on the verge of uncovering a big secret? He decided to talk to Megan, even though he was scared. What if she said it was just a misunderstanding? What if he heard something he didn't want to hear? He approached the topic cautiously, but he could feel his heart beating faster with every passing second. His eyes met hers in the kitchen as she prepared dinner. She smiled at him, but he could see that it wasn't a real smile. It was like a mask she wore to hide her fatigue. He began. "I've noticed some things that worry me. You've changed." She didn't answer right away, just kept chopping vegetables as if it were a normal thing to do. Only after a few minutes of silence did she slowly look up. "It's not what you think, Thomas," she said, and her voice sounded so unnatural that Thomas realized it was not just an excuse. Something big and terrible was hidden behind those words. Thomas did not know what to do. He realized that there were only two options in this situation. Either he allowed himself to close his eyes to the truth again, or he risked seeing something that could tear his world apart. With each new day, his suspicions grew stronger. Thomas wasn't ready for it to become a reality, but the feeling that his wife was cheating on him never left him for a minute. It was only the first part of this mysterious, painful process, but he was already sure that what he was about to find out would change his life forever. Thomas sat in his car, watching Megan's house. Today, he decided to do something he hadn't been able to do before and start an investigation. For days now, he had been questioning whether he should go down this path. After all, every step he took brought him closer to uncovering something that would change everything, his relationships and his life. But the more he thought about it, the more he felt that he couldn't live in this darkness of suspicion any longer. He had to find out the truth, even if it was scary. At night, when Megan fell asleep, Thomas used her phone to check her message and call history. When he opened her messages, he came across the same words that haunted him. But this time he noticed another detail that surprised him. It turned out that her phone was frequently connected to the same number, a number he could not recognize. This number was recorded under the name Robert, but without any other information. For some reason, this name gave Thomas an unpleasant feeling. Was it just a coincidence? Was this really the man he was thinking of? Thomas sighed and realized that this was only the beginning. If he wanted to find out the truth, he had to go all the way. The next day, after work, Thomas decided to go even further. He remembered that Megan had repeatedly talked about her meetings with her friends. But this time, he decided to go to the place where she was going after work without telling him where exactly. Though she promised him that everything would be fine, that it was just a girls' night out, and all she needed was a little break from the routine. But when Thomas pulled up to the cafe she often mentioned, he noticed that her car was parked right outside the entrance. This reinforced his doubts even more. He sat in the car, watching the entrance. Time passed, but Megan did not come out. But after half an hour, he saw an unfamiliar man coming out of the cafe, tall, in a dark suit, with perfectly combed hair. He was talking to Megan in the parking lot, as if just discussing something important. But there was something strange in Megan's eyes. She didn't look at him as if he were a friend. Thomas felt his heart grow heavy. It seemed that this man knew her much better than he did. And again that feeling, why is she hiding it from him? In the evening of the same day, Thomas decided to talk to his friend, Jason, who worked with him at the company. Jason had been his closest friend since university, and he was always ready to listen and give advice. Thomas decided to open up to him. It was the first step to figuring out what was going on. You won't believe it, but I've suspected Megan of something strange a few times already. Thomas began as they sat in a cafe. Suspected? What do you mean? Asked Jason, not looking up from his cup. She's been acting strange, Jason. She hides from me all the time when she gets a message. I think she's afraid of something, and I just saw her meeting with a man. A man I don't know. Jason didn't answer right away. He was thinking about what he had said, but it was clear that he was not indifferent. Maybe you're just overwhelmed, brother. Everyone has the right to their space, and sometimes we feel like there's something wrong with us even if everything is fine, Jason said, trying to calm him down. But Thomas couldn't forget the man leaving the cafe and the look in Megan's eyes. He knew it wasn't just a simple misunderstanding. The next day, after work, Thomas decided to go back to that cafe. And this time he was not alone. He had brought a small digital camera with him to take some photos for his own peace of mind. He was sure that something was wrong, but he couldn't explain what it was yet. When he returned to the spot, he saw her car again. He didn't hesitate and went to the entrance. His heart was pounding, and he felt like he was about to find out something that would change everything. And then, A few minutes later, Thomas saw it through the window. He spotted Megan and the same man. They were sitting at the table, exchanging some intimate glances. Thomas could not keep quiet any longer. Aeneas was more than just meeting a friend. This was a betrayal. His breathing became labored and his heart acted as if someone had stabbed him with a knife. Now he had no more doubts. He knew what he had to do. But what would happen next? Thomas left the cafe feeling his heart continue to race. He couldn't believe what he was seeing. Megan and this man, their meeting was not just friendly. Everything was obvious. He had no doubt that something was going on behind his back. What he had seen was only a confirmation of his suspicions. He returned home, walking heavily up the stairs. His heart was pounding in his chest, and there was only one question in his mind: why? Why is she doing this? How could he not have noticed this before? And what would happen to him now? Megan was at home. She was sitting on the couch, browsing her social media, when Thomas walked into the room. He stood in the doorway for a few seconds, trying to collect his thoughts. She hadn't even had half an hour to see the man, and he had taken so long to come out. "You don't want to hear about it, do you, Era?" Thomas finally said, trying to pull himself together. He already knew the answer, but he couldn't contain his anger. Megan raised her head and looked at him with an ironic smile. She was in no hurry to answer. If everything that was happening was natural to her, not even surprising. But there was something else going on in her eyes, a fleeting excitement that she tried to hide. Thomas felt his chest tighten. He knew there was no turning back now. Megan needed to know that he understood what was happening. He didn't want to go down the path of ignoring or staying silent. It was now or never. Otherwise, everything would lose its meaning. "Anna, I know Megan. I know there is something between you and this man. I can't turn a blind eye anymore. I've seen you've met him, and I don't need any more proof." Thomas's words tore the air between them. A hit was like a stab in the heart. Megan wasn't afraid. Her face remained cool and calm, but you could see her eyes darting around the room in confusion. She tried to find the right words, but there were none. "It's not what you think," she finally said, getting up from her seat and walking to the kitchen. Thomas didn't move, just watched her closely. She was trying to run away from what was happening. He knew it. "If it's not what I think it is, then why are you spending time with him? Why can't you tell me who he is?" "Who is he, Megan?" She didn't answer, and that was the worst of it. The uncertainty, the silence, the lies, all of it was tangible, as if on a physical level. Thomas knew he couldn't let it go. He had to learn more, to understand why it happened and what it meant to him. He decided to go all the way, even if it hurt. "Do you want me to leave it like this, Megan? Do you want me to just forgive all of this? Do you think I haven't noticed?" "You don't understand," she said as she dried her hands on a kitchen towel. "It's not as simple as it sounds." "Well, what is it really like? What does it look like, Megan?" Thomas's voice was filled with frustration. "It's Robert. He's not just a friend. He was my friend even before I met you. We had a past, but when I married you, I decided to put it behind me. But sometimes old feelings come back, and I couldn't help myself." These words tore him apart. They were like a blow from the inside. And in all their years together, their shared moments, their plans for the future, everything seemed like an illusion. It turned out that while he was sure of their happiness, she was pulling him back to someone else. "Do you still love him, Anna?" asked Thomas quietly. Megan fell silent. The silence pulled them both in. She couldn't answer that question, because it was too hard, too painful for both of them. Thomas felt everything crumble around him. He didn't want to hear it, but he had to. All those years together had been a lie. All those hopes for a future together were just something temporary and unreliable. "Does he? Don't know what to do now, Megan," he said, turning and leaving the room. "I'm not sure about anything anymore." He couldn't stay in this house, in these walls, where all the memories now seemed empty. Megan didn't try to stop him. She knew that her words were decisive, but would it be at the end of their relationship? It remained to be seen. Thomas stood at the door, preparing to leave the house. He did not know if he would ever return. But he knew one thing for sure: he could not stay in this deception. No matter how much it hurt, he had to move on. Thomas could no longer stand the silence that filled his life after what had happened. But every day seemed to be a bigger burden than the last. His mind kept wondering why this had happened and why she had decided to hide such an important part of her life from him. So he decided to return home and meet Megan. He felt that this was the moment when everything could change, or it could be completely destroyed. When he entered the apartment, everything was the same as it had been. Nothing had changed. But Thomas felt that there was now a wall between that night. He no longer waited for objections or promises. He had nothing to lose. He just wanted to know the truth. A few minutes passed before Megan left the room. She looked as if her soul was as heavy as a stone. She didn't look at him right away, just sat down on the couch in silence. "Thomas, I know you're disappointed and angry, and you have every right to be. But there's something I've never told you," she began, her voice trembling slightly. Megan felt how hard it was to say these words because they would change everything. As she looked at her hands, as if trying to avoid her husband's gaze, but Thomas did not look away. He was waiting. "Megan," he said with a slight crack in his voice, "have you decided to tell me the truth after all?"
Yes.
She slowly raised her head. "I am guilty, Thomas, and I'm ready to admit it." Thomas felt his heart clench. She had refused to speak before, and now she stood before him, ready to admit her guilt. But what would be the price? Thomas could realize that he had been waiting for this moment for more than just anger or pain. He had been waiting for it because he still loved her, and her every word could have a huge impact on the future. Megan looked into his eyes. "This man is Robert. This is more than just a friend, more than just a meeting. I still couldn't forget him after we got married. And then I started talking to him more and more often. We were just meeting, talking. But you know what happened next. I allowed myself more than I should have." Thomas listened to her, feeling her words gradually sink into his mind. He couldn't understand what had happened, but now it all made sense. Megan had begun to love that man again, and it had forced her to make a choice they would probably never forget. "How could you? How could you do this to me?" Thomas couldn't stop his anger. He felt betrayed, broken, as if his heart had been cut into 1,000 small pieces. But his pain was not just because she had betrayed him, but because he was not important enough to her. He thought they were a team, that they were going through life together. And now it was all a sad joke. Megan bowed her head, and tears began their way down her cheeks. "I know I hurt you so much, Thomas. And I'm sorry that all of this happened. I betrayed you, and that is inexcusable. But I want you to know that it wasn't because of you. You're a wonderful man, and you deserve better. It was because of my own neurosis, because of my desire to get back what I lost long ago. I know you can't forgive me, but I have to say it." Thomas sat there, listening intently. It was terrifying, like a fire burning before his eyes. He was ready to let her go, but she was in front of him, and every word she said became more than just a discussion of her betrayal. She tried to explain, and her every gesture showed that she didn't want to lose him, even if it meant losing everything. "Megan, I don't know what to do with all this. Can I forgive you? I can't say if we can get back together because I don't know what I feel right now. But I will tell you one thing: this has changed me, and I can't just forget everything that happened." Thomas got up and went to the window, when the sun was setting over the horizon and everything around him seemed alien, unfamiliar. He still loved her, but was it possible to go on living after a betrayal? And is it worth trying to rebuild what was destroyed? This question remained open. "I don't know if we can still be together, Megan, but I want to give myself time to figure out what happens next," he said, looking back at her. She stood there, watching in silence, her eyes filling with tears. Their future remained uncertain, but one thing they were sure of was that nothing would be the same. Thomas sat at the table in his living room, surrounded by a silence that frightened him. He tried to organize his thoughts, but they were always jumbled. It was a situation that could not have been foreseen, and betrayal, disappointment, and now fear of an unknown future. All his hopes for reconciliation seemed to be in vain. But Megan had confessed. But would it be enough to make things go back to the way they were? Thomas couldn't help but think that this was only the beginning of a great tragedy. Why he couldn't understand why her love for him had disappeared so quickly. Why he had become just a part of her ruined picture. He still loved Megan, but her betrayal had left a mark on his soul that could not be erased. There was no room in his heart for forgiveness, even though his mind knew that it was the only way to move on. How can you live with a woman who betrayed you? How can you look her in the eye when you know what she has done? Thomas was scared. Scared for his future, scared for his feelings, which were now confused and filled with uncertainty. Thomas looked down at Megan again. She was sitting across from him, looking as broken as he was. Her eyes were full of tears, but he saw no regret in them, no desire to change things. She just sat there, watching him, as if waiting for his decision. She didn't say anything else, just waited in silence for him to make a decision. You should know, he began quietly, that I can't just forget what happened, and I'm afraid I won't be able to trust you anymore. Thomas took a deep breath. He was afraid that talking would no longer be able to bring them back to what had happened. He was afraid that every day would be like an uphill battle to rebuild trust, and his heart would be cut into small pieces every time. Dido, you want me to just forget? Megan replied, her voice filled with emotion. How do you want me to live with this? I'm afraid I've lost you too, Thomas. Silence fell between them again. Thomas felt himself sinking deeper and deeper into the darkness they had both fallen into. All their efforts to try to understand each other seemed futile. He had no confidence that their relationship could ever be the same again. I just don't know what to do. Thomas finally said it out loud. It was a truth he could not hide. There was a storm in his soul that would not stop. He no longer felt like the same man he had been before. The betrayal had changed his perception of not only Megan, but of himself. What was left of him after all this? Megan, I'm afraid I've lost myself. I don't know who I am now, if we can be together, or if we want to be. I'm scared that this relationship could end, and we'll be on the verge of divorce again. And I don't know if I can stand it again. All these questions hung in the air like a heavy fog. Thomas sat there like a lost soul, trying to figure out what to do next. He realized that the decision depended on him. This was the moment when he had to either let go or hold on, despite the pain. And he knew that it was not just an emotional decision. It was a choice between maintaining his dignity or forgiving, and trying to rebuild everything. I don't know if we can ever be the same again, Thomas said, barely able to get the words out. I'm hurt, and I don't know if I can survive this. Megan, I don't know if I'm ready to continue this relationship. Megan got up and walked over to him, but there was no attempt to justify herself on her face. She just stood there, watching him, trying to figure out if there was still a chance for salvation. She seemed to be experiencing this moment in the same way, as if she too could not find her place in the world they had destroyed together. I don't know what will happen next, Thomas, but I'm ready to wait, ready to work on myself to find a solution. If you're ready. Thomas took another deep breath. What was happening to him, to them? Could this attempt be a chance for a new life, or was it just an illusion they had all created for themselves? He had his doubts, and they were not going away. But now there was only one thing he could give it time. A time to see if he could forgive, if he could be with her again. But even if he could find the strength to forgive, could he ever trust her again? Megan and Thomas were left in this limbo, each waiting for the other's decision. There was no clarity between them, but there was a silence that silently asked one big question. What happens next? Thomas sat in his chair looking at the old photos on the shelf. And his life was completely upside down, and even his memories did not give him a sense of peace. He woke up every morning feeling so alone and confused. He still couldn't believe what had happened to his relationship with Megan, but this moment of loneliness didn't last long. Suddenly, his phone buzzed. Thomas looked at the screen. It was the number of John, his old friend. They hadn't seen each other for several years, after Thomas and Megan moved to another state. He had always appreciated John because he was honest and straightforward. Perhaps this call could have given him what he had been looking for: support and advice during this difficult time. Thomas did not hesitate to answer. "Hi, John," he said, trying to hide the excitement in his voice. I haven't heard from you in a long time." "I'm here, John replied, his voice sounding confident and determined. "I heard you were in a difficult situation. I want you to know that I'm here, and if you need to talk, I'm always available." Thomas was surprised. He hadn't asked John for support in a long time, but at that moment his words were like a lifeline. Megan had betrayed him, and he didn't know where to go from here. Every day it became harder and harder to cope with his emotions. Thomas invited John to his house, and he immediately agreed. Within an hour, John was at his house. They sat down on the couch, and Thomas told him about everything that had happened, about Megan's betrayal, his disappointment, pain, and doubts. "I've heard a lot about what's going on with you, but you're not alone, Thomas," John said, taking a few sips of his beer. "It's hard, sure, but life doesn't end with betrayal. Even the worst moments can be turning points if you handle them right." Thomas had his doubts, but he felt that John's words made sense. It had been a long time since he had heard such simple but true advice. Maybe I'm just afraid of what I've lost," Thomas admitted. "I can't forget what happened, and every day is getting harder." John listened carefully and took a deep breath. "You're afraid of losing Megan. This is understandable, but think about whether she is the one you love. Isn't it just an illusion of what was? A person who cheats cannot remain your half. And you have the right to real happiness, and for that you need to ask yourself, can this woman bring you what you really want?" Thomas listened to John and felt a little lighter. It had been a long time since he had spoken to someone so frankly. He had often wondered if Megan was really what he was looking for, but his fear of loneliness kept him from making a final decision. "Anna, you need support," John added, drawing attention to himself again. "Don't try to go through this alone. I've known you for a long time, and you're stronger than you think." Thomas had experienced an internal breakdown. He had always been someone who tried to keep everything under control, but this time he felt helpless. His every thought was about Megan, and even now, when he tried to gather his strength, it was all meaningless. John was right. He shouldn't have stayed in a relationship where he couldn't be happy. But there was still uncertainty in his heart. "I know you want to put it behind you, but it's hard," John said. But remember that you will feel better with time. Don't try to get all the answers right away. Give yourself time." Thomas thought again. He knew that of all his fears, the biggest one was the unknown future. But again and again John emphasized the importance of time and space for himself. "Thank you," Thomas said, feeling somehow relieved. "I needed to hear that." After this conversation, Thomas began to realize that it was important for him not only to understand his feelings for Megan, but also to return to himself. He had to first learn to love himself again and trust himself. Anna Kai still didn't know what would happen next, but he realized that you can only move forward when you are ready to stand up, even if there are pieces of the past in your way. John helped him to see a way out of this desperate situation, and although the answers remained difficult, Thomas felt that he was gaining control of his life again. "It's going to be okay, I'm sure of it," he said. Even A.O. Thomas began to look for new opportunities for himself, seeing how he could change his life. Although he didn't have any clear answers yet, he was ready to embrace the new possibilities, letting go of all his doubts. And now he felt he had the power to make a new beginning. It had been several weeks since Thomas had experienced the revelation of Megan's infidelity. In that time, he had changed. He was no longer the same man who had tried to maintain the illusion of a perfect relationship in front of the world. No, he was a different person now, more mature, more cautious. Now he knew for sure that a relationship is not just a perfect picture in a photo and fun moments. It is much deeper. It is about trust, honesty, and mutual respect. And yet, the feelings of pain and betrayal never left him. All this time he was trying to find inner peace, but it was hard at heart. Suddenly, on one of those evenings when everything seemed so empty, Thomas received a message. And it was Megan. "Can I talk to you?" The question in the message was short but clear. Thomas looked at the phone screen, and his heart suddenly beat faster. Megan reappeared in his life. At first, he couldn't decide whether to respond. 4 weeks, he had been trying to forget her, to sort out his feelings, and now she was reaching out to him again. He felt somewhat confused. What does she want? He thought. After all, why would she come to him after everything that had happened? Betrayal, again she betrayed his trust, and now she just needs to talk. But instead of continuing to hesitate, Thomas decided that he had to find out. After a few minutes of thought, he replied to the messaging. "Okay, let's talk." Megan invited him for coffee at a local coffee shop that had become their favorite since the beginning of the relationship. They would meet there after work, sit at tables by the windows, laugh and tell each other their deepest thoughts. But now everything has changed. When Thomas arrived, Megan was already sitting at the table, looking very nervous. And her eyes were openly sad, and her face, as always, was covered with light makeup, but now it did not hide her inner anxiety. "You came," she said when she saw him, her voice softer than Thomas remembered. It was as if she was ready for something serious, but still wanted to take it back. Thomas sat down across from her. "Megan, I don't know what you expect from me." "What are you trying to say?" Megan took a deep breath, her hands gripping her coffee cup as tightly as if it would help her steady herself. "I want to apologize to you for everything. I know I've hurt you, and there hasn't been a day that I haven't regretted everything that's happened. I betrayed you, I betrayed our love, and I'm so sorry." Thomas listened, but he felt that the words she was saying could not change what he was feeling. He could see her tears, but they could not take away the pain that was building up inside him. Was it sincere? Or was it just an attempt to return to a comfortable past? "I don't know if I can ever forgive you, Megan," Thomas said, trying to keep his voice calm. "You've broken everything we've built. How can I ever trust you after what happened?" Megan started to cry again. Her voice was shaking. "I'm not asking you to forgive me right away. I just want you to know how hard it is for me to live with the fact that I betrayed you. I may not deserve a second chance, but I want one. And I want to prove to you that I can be different." Thomas sat and looked at Megan. His heart was breaking. He felt everything inside him protesting against accepting her apology. But at the same time, he couldn't ignore the part of him that still loved her. "Do you want to come back to me?" he asked, trying to stay calm. "But how can I just forget what you did? You broke my trust. You made me feel like I was nothing." Megan shook her head, unable to find the words to explain. She already knew that she probably wouldn't be able to find easy answers to all his questions. They sat in silence, each deep in thought. Eventually, Thomas got up, deciding to leave the moment unfinished. He didn't know what would happen next, but today's meeting had only reinforced his inner doubts. It was not yet clear whether he should give her a second chance. Too much had been lost to just let go, and too much pain to ignore. "I'm not ready to forgive you now, Megan," he said. "But maybe in the future. I'll think about it. You need to give me time. Megan just nodded, new tears shining in her eyes. Her words were simple, but no less difficult. I will wait, Thomas. And maybe someday I will deserve your forgiveness. Thomas walked away, leaving Megan in silence, and although he didn't know what would happen next, he knew for sure that this time he wouldn't make any hasty decisions. He needed more time, more reflection, and perhaps even more pain to see if what had been lost could be regained. After their last meeting, where Megan tried to apologize, Thomas left her with her doubts and tears. Many a time passed, but nothing got easier. Megan's inner turmoil never left her. She couldn't stop thinking about what she had done. Her doubts grew with each passing day, and her feelings became even more confused. The choice she faced was brutal: leave everything behind and move on, or make an attempt to get back with the man she once loved. One evening, sitting at home in the kitchen, Megan stared at one point, and her gaze was blank. There was a glass of cold water in front of her, but she didn't even pay attention to it. Her thoughts were on one thing: Thomas. She couldn't forget what he had said. I need more time. The time she needed was a source of great anxiety. She didn't even know how to start a conversation with him now. By doing so, she had broken not only her relationship with her husband, but also herself. What should she do? To accept that all is lost and just file for divorce? Or is there still a chance to save at least some of what was between them? The choice was not only between divorce and trying to fix everything, but also between dignity and love. She could not get rid of the feeling of guilt that had been with her from the very beginning. Could she still earn Thomas's trust, or was it impossible? Megan decided that she needed to think more. She couldn't act on impulse. She needed to understand why she had done what she had done. What made her betray the man she once loved? Why couldn't she stop and sort out her feelings in time? And what should she do with all these questions now? She had to choose whether to continue fighting for the relationship or accept its end. Thomas was calling her less and less, and Megan felt his emotional wall rising between them. They were strangers again, and it hurt her. Every call, every message from him was full of cold distance. Megan felt as if she was on the sidelines of her own life. But this day was different. She went to the same cafe where they had often met, when everything was still perfect. She hoped that this place would help her find answers. They had to talk, and maybe this was the last time they would ever talk together. Thomas came to the meeting, and when he saw Megan, his face did not change. He was not angry or offended. He was just nervous and broken. He didn't want to and couldn't make a decision right away. He had only come to hear her again. Megan, he began, sighing. Do you really want us to start again? Do you realize it's not as simple as apologizing and forgiving? Megan nodded, looking hard into his eyes. I know I can't turn back the clock, but I want to fight. I want to earn your trust again. I'm ready to change myself. Thomas thought for a few minutes and then said, I can't just let this go, Megan. You have hurt me so much, but I can't ignore what happened between us either. So I'm asking you to give me time to think. Megan breathed a sigh of relief. Although the decision was open-ended and the future remained uncertain, she felt that at least all was not lost. The evening did not provide any clear answers, but it left Megan with the feeling that, at least for now, they were both on the cusp of something new. The choice still had to be made, but each of them knew that they were not the same now. And even if the choice was difficult, it still had a chance to be right. Megan sat on the old couch, in the living room where she and Thomas had first spent their night, after long hours of talking about the future. And now her thoughts were overwhelmed, like waves on a stormy sea. She stared out the window into the darkness, trying to find clarity amidst this chaos of feelings. 10 years together, and now it all seemed so far away. How did they end up here? How did they get to this point? Thomas sat next to him, but there was such a distance between them that it seemed like 1,000 miles. They were silent, each of them deep in thought. It was the moment when every word seemed superfluous. All the previous conversations, all the attempts to build a relationship again, now merged into something fuzzy and blurred. They couldn't turn back time, and it was palpable in the air. It was so strong that each of them could feel the wounds in their hearts reopening. Megan knew that even if she took this step, it would never be the same. They were changed. They would never be the same again. Thomas, she began, but the words froze in her throat again. How to express everything she felt. How to explain what words couldn't. Aku, Megan, he answered, his voice quiet and heavy. I don't know if we can start again. Maybe I'm trying to find the answer to a question that can't be asked. She lowered her head, sighing heavily. These words, these unpleasant, difficult words, left her no room for hope. She could not even imagine what would happen next. How do you regain trust? How do you build a relationship when you feel like you're too far away from who you used to be? They were both silent for a few more minutes. The sound of the clock ticking away was the only sound in the room. Megan took a deep breath, trying to gather all her thoughts into a single thread. Thomas, I don't know what to do. I know it's not easy, but I'm ready to start again. But only if you want it to. Thomas looked at her with pain in his eyes. His voice was quiet but firm. I don't know if there is a chance of that. But I know one thing, you hurt me, and for a reason. I'm not sure I can ever make things right. These words pierced her heart, but Megan did not look away. She found the strength to continue speaking. I want to try, Thomas. Maybe we can fix it, or at least find a way to start again. But it's going to be hard, and I know it's not that easy. Thomas closed his eyes, his hand slipping to his forehead. All his strength was leaving him, but he couldn't leave. He felt that if he left everything, it would be the final end of it, or maybe it was already too late. Silence fell again. Megan sat there holding her breath, waiting for him to speak next. She realized that there was only one way out of this situation. Their solution could only come in the form of time. And a time they had to give themselves to come to a decision. And yet, her heart was beating relentlessly. They could not leave this question unanswered. Thomas looked at her and finally spoke. I can't answer that now, Megan. It's too important. I need to think about it. I need to understand how I feel, and whether I can ever forgive you. Megan sat with her head down and stared into the void. She knew it was not the end. But what was it? A new beginning. A last attempt. The choice they both had to make was still ahead of them. Could they rebuild trust and start over, or would their past remain a shadow hanging between them? And finally, this question remained unanswered. It was this uncertainty that left them in a state in which they both felt that there was no answer. And perhaps this ending was one that opened more questions than it answered. But neither of them was ready to leave this moment behind. For now, they remained at a crossroads, feeling that their future was uncertain. And while Thomas and Megan choose what to do, their lives continue to move forward, with an open ending that leaves room for new stories. It was not the end, but only a new beginning in which each of them had to find their own way. But can they overcome their pain and fears to rebuild what once was between them? Only time will tell.